When I say grief, what do you think of?
When you're happy that you did something or that you're relieved that...
Good grief.
Good grief. Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Like the sadness or mourning of when you lose someone or something that's important to you.
That seems really good that you said losing someone or something. So what are some situations where people might grieve?
Oh, I lost my favourite shirt. I'm still looking for it. Still very upset about it.
When people have disorders or like cancer, stuff like that.
Definitely.
Like object-wise, maybe something, I don't know, maybe like a really important necklace that they got from someone really special and then they lost it. Or maybe they lost like a really important job to them that they really wanted or
A missed
like,
opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, you could grieve to not really have a childhood. You could be looking after your younger siblings, or you had to grow up really quick. That could be a thing of grieving as well.
Okay, let's just stop that conversation about what grief is just for a second.
You're listening to Parting. My name is Georgia and I'm your host for this episode.
And I'm Phil, George's offsider. You've just been listening to a recording of some of us in conversation with Bianka.
She works for the health service near where we live.
And in regards to what grief is, we asked her if we were on the right track.
I really don't think I could say it any better than what you have all described. Really, grief is our response to loss. And you've all described some of those really physical or tangible losses, like your favourite shirt, as well as the more unseen or invisible losses, like a role or friendships. And each of our response to loss is going to look very different. For some people, it might be that feeling of overwhelm or sadness or distress, sometimes even that feeling of happiness. And that's, for some people, in grief, that's true too. There can almost be a feeling of relief or even just gratitude for the time you did have with that person or thing. So it's no one thing, but dependent on our responses.
With that as well, you can also not feel anything at all. Like if something happens, you can just not react to it at all. You can just feel nothing.
Yeah, you might be numb, or sometimes after a really significant loss you might be in shock for a little while, and maybe it hits you out of the blue years later where you start to feel something and think, oh goodness, now that makes sense in a new way. Particularly when you're grieving something like you said, a lost childhood. You might not know that you've lost your childhood until you're an adult and you think, oh golly, I didn't have that experience that I'm seeing other siblings or friends or children have. I think that's very true for children and young people, that it's not just one grief that you process and get over, that it's a lifetime of it making sense in new ways.
That's kind of what we're doing in Parting.
Trying to make sense of grief and death and dying.
We are a group of young people who happen to live in places that are considered disadvantaged.
The places where we live are on the homelands of the Dharawal, Alauri and Wadi Wadi peoples.
And we want to acknowledge and pay respects to the elders of where we live. Usually in our podcast, each episode has different kinds of stories. Some of them fictional, and some of them more like the conversation that you've just been listening to.
But today, we're starting something different.
The fictional story you're going to hear soon is just the beginning of a long yarn that will go over the next 5 or 6 episodes. But before we get to it, let's jump back into the conversation again. You're listening to Bianka talking with Zane, Alara, Melody, Shanice, and Phil from our crew.
Some people say that grief is the cost of love. I think that's very true. If you don't love something, you don't mind when it's gone. But when you do and you feel connected to it, then there's this hole that's left behind without it.
But I don't want to think of it as it's not just a cost to it, though. It's not just the cost of loving, is it? Is there something good about grief in and of itself? Or is it just something we've got to endure?
It's not bad or good.
I think it really depends on the situation as well, and like you as a person.
And maybe which part of it you're in.
There's something to be said, I think, for what Hugh Mackey would call wholehearted living, which is the full spectrum of joy and sadness and vulnerability and connection, and that's life.
Yeah. And have you ever been at a funeral or something like that, and it's like there's a massive relief if you have a good cry, you feel better after.
Even not being at a funeral, it's like good to have a cry every now and again.
Yeah, because the process of feeling it helps you to feel better.
Just wrapping around it again, but grieving is, the act of the love that has been given towards you. Like, it's the experience of that feeling for something or someone and being able to acknowledge it as well. If someone's just pissed off or something and they just go on a rampage or something, if someone passed away, then, it's not just them acting up, it could be their reaction to grief as well.
Absolutely right.
Grief can be like a roller coaster at the same time. Like you're happy one day and then the next you're just all over the place.
It certainly teaches us a lot, I think. Our response to grief and how we work through it teaches us what we need to cope. For some people that's sharing and connecting and talking about it. For some people it's being by themselves and maybe writing things down or writing songs or whatever process. But I think when you learn what strategies help you, that'll serve you well in all different types of life, all different challenges that you might face.
So the fictional story we're going to jump into now is the story of a class.
A class of Year 9 school students, basically a bunch of 14, 15-year-olds.
The story is called The Unteachables, because that's just how they feel about themselves.
They're not
the kids who are good at school.
Not the ones who have it all worked out.
Not the ones who people expect great things from.
But they do have one thing. They're little
They're little
No. Oops. Well, that is what the teachers say in the staff room. And that reminds us that we need to warn you that this episode contains...
some swear words.
Well, we are talking about Year 9 students.
And unlike the swear we just beeped, the rest of the swears are not beeped.
If you prefer a fully beeped version, send us a message and we can make one for you.
So, here we go. The Unteachables, Part 1.
And pain.
Standing up to the pain.
I might never come up for air.
It was a sunny day, hot and dry.
But in my skin.
It felt like rain. Then,
as if it was just any other moment.
One last big breath in.
And let go.
Ty was always getting into trouble at school.
Getting into trouble.
He spent more time outside the door than inside the classroom.
He wasn't even that bad, really.
Not naughty.
Just a bit of a smart aleck.
And that's probably why most of the teachers didn't like him.
If he so much as walked into the room with his hat the wrong way, he'd be sent out straight away.
It just felt like all the teachers were picking on him.
We're just picking on him.
Except for Miss Biddle.
Everyone has a favourite teacher they remember from school. That one teacher who understood you. Who accepted you for who you are. Miss Biddle was that one teacher for most of the students at the school.
She taught English mostly, and she always had the level 3 class.
Level 3 is just a nice way of saying...
the dumb ones.
The Unteachables.
Which is what everyone else called that class anyway.
A class for the kids that weren't real good at English.
Or just couldn't be bothered.
But this class was particularly full.
Because kids would just pretend to be dumb to get Miss Biddle as a teacher.
To get Miss Biddle as a teacher.
But Miss Biddle wasn't at school today.
Or yesterday.
Or for the last month. The students were told that she had taken leave.
But what was that supposed to mean?
I reckon she's sick, like really bad.
My aunt got pneumonia once and was in hospital for like 3 months.
Maybe she got married and was on her honeymoon.
Remember she had that boyfriend who'd pick her up sometimes?
Yeah, he was hot.
Ew, Grody, he's like 40 actually.
I'd still get in his car.
She's probably just had enough of her shitty kids like us. And is on the beach of the Gold Coast somewhere.
Wherever she wasn't at school. Which meant Ty was outside the classroom again. Even outside the classroom, he couldn't help himself.
There was a thin window slit in the wooden door.
Where if you just stood to the side, you could see the class without the teacher seeing you.
Ty was pressed up against the door, presenting his middle finger to Kane.
He was pretty much in the centre of the class at his desk.
The middle finger was being used in a very creative collection of ways. Kane held up notes back to Ty saying things like, ball bag,
and to eat shit, maggot face. The substitute teacher for today was Fresh Meat. Straight out of uni or doing a placement, who cares? They never lasted long.
This one had done pretty well though.
Only because half of the class thought he was cute.
Aisha was standing at his desk.
as he tried to explain the work he'd set for the class.
This was the third time she'd been down the front.
She knew exactly what she was meant to be doing.
So what point of view have you written the story
The
from?
teacher said,
Oh, I don't know.
said Aisha.
Okay, so you've got first person, which is I, where the author uses I. So in second person, you use you, and so the reader is a part of the story. And then you've got third person, where there's a narrator, and the narrator is basically looking in on the other people's lives.
Oh, yeah.
Said Aisha, fluttering her eyelids.
He lasted 2 weeks. Before him was Mrs. Crookshanks, who was as old as the dinosaurs, blind as a bat, and boring as batshit.
And boring as batshit.
The curfew tolls the knell of parting day.
The best
And
thing about
leaves
old
the world
Buddy, she was
to
really
darkness
good at
and
putting
to
people
me.
to sleep.
What a feeling of peace there is, don't you agree?
Which worked out well because even if you fell asleep in class, she couldn't see you to notice.
She couldn't see you to
The
notice.
moping owl. Now let's have a look at that. The moping owl. Do you understand what moping means? Anyone must have some idea about that? No idea about moping?
Shame she didn't notice the flower on top of the fans in the room before she turned them on. Everyone thought they may have gone too far when she started to choke after inhaling some of it. But it seemed to give old Batty a bit of a kick.
No one had ever seen her as animated as when she was shouting her head off through the coffee.
And then she was out.
2 for 2.
The fool says to King Lear.
The last substitute the class had was a youngish, thinks he's hip, and down with the kids, call me by my first name, Todd.
Lend less than thou owest.
Todd the Bod, everyone called him, which was a joke.
Which was a joke because Todd was small and scrawny with the build of a teenage boy in his late 30s.
Not to his face, though.
Not to his face, though. To his face, they all called him Sir.
Because they knew that would piss him right off.
Leave thy drink and thy whore, and keep it in a door, and thou shalt have more than 2 tens to a score.
Todd the Bod got it into his head
that for the poetry part of the curriculum, he was going to educate the Unteachables in Shakespeare.
In Shakespeare?
Isn't he dead?
Said Shauna.
Yeah, Shakespeare has been dead quite a long time. What we're going to do now, if you don't mind. Sorry, what was your name?
Ben, Dover.
Said Ty.
And my name's Wayne Kirk.
Said Kate.
I bet you guys spent all recess thinking those up, didn't you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You spent all this just fixing your hair, but still doesn't look good.
Todd the Bod got a transfer out west. Bye, Todd.
Bye, Todd.
The next week,
much to both the substitutes' and students' relief, Miss Biddle returned from taking leave. It was as if no time had passed.
Everyone was so happy.
Everyone was happy to have her back.
Still,
the rumours around why she left in the first place had built up over the time she was gone and gotten more and more ridiculous.
And they got more and more ridiculous.
There was even one going around about how she'd been arrested for drug possession and distribution. That she was doing dodgy dealings with old folks who wanted medical marijuana.
Who wanted medical marijuana?
everyone wanted to know.
But no one wanted to be the one to ask.
Okay, how's everyone going? Does anybody have any questions?
Said Miss Biddle, looking up.
Until Sam slipped Aisha a fiver. Miss,
Said Aisha.
how come you've been away for so long?
Miss Biddle looked hesitant.
Maybe it was drugs.
She took a deep, resigned breath.
Well, I needed to go and look after my dad, actually. He was really sick. He couldn't look after himself anymore. And then he died.
No one had even thought of that.
I guess you don't really think of teachers as having moms and dads.
Boyfriends and cocktails on the Gold Coast and dealing drugs, yeah.
But not families.
But that wasn't really what was on everybody's mind. At that moment,
Ty could feel every eye in the class turn slowly from Miss Biddle to him.
To him?
Saved by the...
Miss Biddle hadn't taken Todd the Bod's lead in continuing with the works of the long-dead William Shakespeare. Instead, she was teaching them about the traditional Japanese poetry form of haiku.
Of haiku?
This was perfect.
An easy enough form to understand.
3 lines, 5 syllables in the first and last lines, and 7 in the middle.
And none of it had to rhyme.
And because Miss Biddle was so easygoing with them,
they could pretty much write whatever they wanted, as long as it followed the form and had limited swearing.
Okay, so who wants to read their haiku? Don't everyone speak at once. What about you, Sarah?
Do I have to, miss?
Yes, you have to. Stand up, please.
Sarah stood up and read her poem aloud with the enthusiasm of someone reading the ingredients list of a can of beans.
The birds are singing from the trees outside of the class. Summer is still around.
Everyone groaned.
Everyone groaned a little under their breath, except Kane.
That was crap, miss. Whatever, bitch. Doesn't even have the right number of syllables.
Doesn't even have the right number of syllables, said Kane. He was right.
He was right.
All right, Kane. You're so good at this. Let's hear yours.
Kane jumped up confidently, held his book in one hand and kept the other hand free to count off the syllables in his poem as he went.
I think boobs are great. Big ones, small ones, saggy ones. Boobies, boobies, tits.
Everyone was cracking up.
Okay, yeah.
Kane was pretty pleased with himself, and Miss Biddle seemed impressed with the effort, just slightly less with the subject.
Has the right number of syllables too, Miss?
It certainly does, and it was very funny.
I have more.
Yeah, Miss said suspiciously, but do I really want to hear them?
Do I really want to hear them?
You know how you love my jokes.
You know how you love my jokes, miss.
Okay.
Okay.
Kane resumes his one-handed reading, kept his spare hand free for an animated enactment of his next poem.
I can make noises with my hand and underarm. Fighty, fighty, fight.
It was pretty funny.
Everyone thought so, except Sarah, who was quickly finishing off her rebuttal to Kane's earlier slamming of her syllable-deprived poem.
I've got one, miss.
She said.
Okay.
Okay, said Miss Biddle, surprised. Let's hear it.
Poor old Kane Duncan vomited on himself, then ate it up for tea.
Kane rolled his eyes.
Haha, bitch.
Oh, that's
Great.
impressive,
You just thought of
said
that
Miss.
then?
That was quick thinking. Well done,
Shayla, have you got one?
Miss Biddle said.
Shayla was pretty quiet at the best of times.
When she did speak up, it was normally with something clever.
She was clever. One of those kids who pretended to be not so clever to get into the class.
Shayla stood up reluctantly and held her book up so it covered her face.
I hate you, haiku. You are very hard to do. Go back to Japan.
Everybody laughed, including Miss Biddle, and Shayla sunk back into her seat, half embarrassed, half pleased.
Anyone else? Ty, come on. You're the king of comedy. Let's see if you can beat these other jokers.
This should be good, they all thought. Ty was great at coming up with smart-ass writing. If he really wanted to, he could probably become one of those people who write stuff for sketch shows on the TV.
Come on. What have you got?
I've got more than one. I don't know which one to do.
Well, that's okay. Let's hear them all. And then everyone can decide which one's the funniest.
Ty stood up. He looked down at the words on the page.
When my father died, I held my breath
When my
in for
father
days,
died,
scared to
I
let
held
it
my
go.
breath in for days, scared to let it go. When my father died, I felt a dark grey bird was pecking from inside. When my father died, the bright sun burnt my open eyes, leaving grains of sand. When my father died, a last breath pushed out grey clouds and then the rain fell.
A silence enveloped the classroom as Ty sat down.
He held the attention of every single person in the room.
Even Ray peered out from the curtain of hair that usually covered his whole face and hid the headphones that were normally in his ears.
That was not what anyone was expecting to happen.
Everybody knew about Ty's dad.
But nobody ever talked about it, especially not Ty.
Especially not Ty.
And now here he was.
The funniest kid in the class.
Using an opportunity he would normally have seized to make everyone laugh, was talking about some heavy stuff.
Real
stuff. Stuff that people don't normally talk about.
Death.
Grief.
Ty sat there.
In the center of the silence.
Not feeling like the center of anything.
When he wrote the words on the paper, he wasn't thinking that he would have to share them with anyone else.
They were for him.
Very well for him.
Sharing them with other people,
With his whole class.
might have made him feel embarrassed.
Shameful even.
But for whatever reason, it didn't. It was okay. He was okay.
It was okay.
Not like great or happy or relieved.
Like a weight had been taken off his shoulders. which seems like something you would say in a moment like this.
But it was just okay. Everyone else may have been feeling a bit awkward or sad or sorry for him, but he couldn't feel that right now. Miss Biddle finally cut through the quiet. Wow.
Wow.
Thanks, Ty. That was really impressive.
That was really impressive.
And brave.
And brave.
For homework, I want everyone to try and follow what Ty's done here. Write about something real that's happened in your life.
Ty had seen something in Miss Biddle since she had been back. Something he knew really well. And there was something about seeing it in someone else, hearing someone else talk about it, made it okay.
And just like that, it had started.
To be continued. You're gonna find out what they started in the coming episodes of Parting.
And actually, we're going to come back to this story again in this episode.
But before that, in our conversation with Bianca,
We turned our attention away from the word grief to some other words that come up in connection with death and dying.
Mourning. That is another word, isn't it? Yeah?
But what is that?
When someone dies,
Yeah.
I don't know, the first thing that comes to my head when they go to heaven.
Yeah. What about you? You said the word Melody. What?
When I think of mourning, for me it's like acknowledging, like, say, a person. Like when they pass, like acknowledging all the memories you've had with them, the feelings you've had for them, and just like missing them, you know?
Yeah.
It's that space of time where they get to go through everything they've done with like said person, or go through all the memories and everything, and it's like just a period of time, or it could be however long they need or want.
Yeah. Because that is interesting, isn't it? Because in different cultures, it's like a formal thing. It's like grief you think of as being, that could be any length of time in it.
Yeah.
But mourning, in some cultures, it's like a specific, they even go, you know, you have to wear black for this many weeks, or in some First Nations cultures, for a certain period, you don't mention the person's name, or what's mourning to you, Bianca?
To me, mourning is a lot about the rituals and norms that we hold for that period after somebody has died. And I'm glad you said culture, because I think it is almost the culture of grief, and it does look different for each family unit, each community will have their own little norms and rules around how we let go of someone or learn to acknowledge that they've died or left us. And particularly in Australia, a big part of that can be a funeral or a memorial or a way of acknowledging that person's life. We don't tend to have as concrete rules around time limits as much. You might notice that your kind of mourning within your family looks very different to your neighbours or to your friends. And sometimes it's good to acknowledge, well, this is what it looks like for us, because then you can see how that differs or what's common between you and your friends or who else is in your life. What we know, without a doubt, is there's no right or wrong way to grieve. What's important is that we are empowered to make those choices for ourselves. So for some people, that means not going to a funeral because that's not how they want to acknowledge this loss. Sometimes it's not by choice as well. My family's overseas, so whenever I've lost a family member, it hasn't been realistic for me to go to another country to attend the funeral. And that's something that's quite sad, but I found my other ways of acknowledging that loss.
So what would be some other ways if you...
FaceTime, something like that.
Well, yes, you could attend a funeral or something like that virtually. People had to do it in COVID, didn't they?
Some of the things that I've heard people doing to acknowledge their loss are things like going to a special place that held some significance for that person. Maybe it's a beach that you always went to, or a walk, or a favourite restaurant or cafe. Sometimes it's looking at photos of that person or videos.
Cooking their favourite meal like on their birthday or something.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful example. And I like the word ritual because often it becomes these patterns of ways that we continue to acknowledge that person and our relationship to them long after they've gone.
Is it okay to talk about death and dying to children?
Yeah, it is. So often I get this question of, there's a child who's this age, should they come to the funeral, or how do we explain it? And depending on the age of a child impacts how much they understand about death. But we should always try to explain it as well as we can using simple terms like died. Maybe they have another experience of an animal that they've seen die or an extended family member, because as much as we want to protect them, you know, this is the part of life. Children can also surprise us because they don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. This is just, okay, well, that's what happens then, I suppose, which is perhaps a lesson to us all. But the alternative of not talking about it or softening it, like saying they just went to sleep, that can be quite scary for a child because they start to wonder, will I not wake up if I go to sleep? Or there's just this big gap of where the person used to be that nobody's talking to them about, and that's really confusing and scary as well.
There's probably lots of resources out there that actually, you know, people could read with people to have a yarn or listen to stories or...
There's some beautiful picture books out there.
Yeah.
Talking about just the life cycle of all creatures, and that as humans we're vulnerable to that life cycle as well.
Well, Miss Biddle's English class did what she asked them to.
They did follow Ty's lead. They took the opportunity to write about the real things that happened in their lives.
And they started sharing them.
And they started sharing them.
Just like Ty did.
Just like Ty did.
With each other.
Let's jump back into the story. Straight into another lesson where a poem is being read out to the class.
Music to the ears. The sound of a V8. That's 2 cylinders in each bank of the engine, firing in succession, separated by firings and alternating banks. How do I know this? My dad. Between the left and the right banks, it's a pattern that goes like this. Left, left, right, right, left, right. And the banks often have slightly different tones, like the notes coming from 2 organ pipes. So the V8 plays a chord rather than just a single note. Music to the ears. That's what my dad says. Winding the windows down on a hot day, smelling the summer rushing past, the V8 pushing us on through time and heat. Dad's tunes on the radio, Mum laughing and singing along, us kids straining at our buckles, remembering snatches of the words and belting them out. So tired, at the end of the trip, Dad will lift us out of the car and carry us straight to bed. We could hear the sound of the V8 when Dad was a block from home, and we would be at the front, waiting, as he pulled up in the drive. When Dad left, Mum still sang the same songs, but late at night, after vodka and lime on ice, while me and my sisters lay in bed, knowing the words now and finding the love songs a little hard to take. Now I wait on Saturday afternoons, listening for that V8 sound. I can hear one in the distance and get my hopes up, but often they all pass me by and he doesn't turn up. Music to the ears, the sound of the V8. But nowadays, the chord has taken on a kind of minor key.
Shanice was normally so shy, so it was a big deal that she had stood up and done her poem.
The class applauded like crazy.
Class had started to feel different for the Unteachables.
For the Unteachables.
There was a different kind of energy in the room.
Or maybe it was the same energy that existed before, just transformed or harnessed into something new.
They treated each other differently, especially within the walls of the English class.
As Shanice sat down, it came back to Ty.
It was 1 year ago today that his dad passed away.
In some ways, he was a bit jealous of Miss Biddle.
In some ways, he was jealous that Miss Biddle had more time with her dad than he had with his. But in another way, maybe it would have made it worse or harder to cope with the grief if you had more time to get used to having someone around. And then all of a sudden, they're gone.
Did all the adults find it harder?
Did all adults find it harder then, seeing as how they'd known people for longer?
He noticed that Miss Biddle was looking at him.
Like she sensed what was going on in his head.
She asked him to stay back after class. He was glad to.
The rest of the class bustled out.
Their sounds flowing away down the corridor like a wave.
Is your family doing anything today? Miss Biddle asked him.
Mum said we're going to the cemetery after I get back home.
What will you do there? She asked.
I think we're going to take some flowers and some like music that I like. And then,
Yeah.
She said softly.
Ty thought, yeah, she did know.
What do you do, miss? He asked her.
Do you mean at the cemetery? She said.
Yes, miss.
Well, I haven't actually been back there yet.
That surprised him.
Why, miss?
She turned her head sideways,
Thinking.
Not ready, I guess.
I
like to remember him alive. Not in the ground, I suppose. Ty nodded.
What was he like? He asked.
Miss Biddle smiled straight away.
He was a funny bloke. Bit of a joker. Bit like you, I guess. He was still joking a day before he died.
He'd kind of been fading away and hadn't spoken for a day or two. And we thought he was just going to die.
Then all of a sudden one morning he just kind of woke up, seemed really together, cracked all these jokes, made us all laugh.
That night he grew tired again.
And then he slept. And I guess he didn't wake up again.
The air was warm and still coming in the window.
And it filled the moment that came after that between them, while Ty formed his question. Were you with him when he stopped breathing? He said. Yes, she said, nodding.
I was with Mum and my two sisters.
What was that like for you? She asked.
I don't know, he said.
There weren't words for that, really.
But he tried.
He was breathing slower and slower, and it got all raspy. And then he just sort of did a really big breath.
Then he was still. Yeah, she said simply. I wasn't scared, but he said.
It was kind of peaceful.
And we just sat there for a while, and we cried. And the nurse heard us and came in. But she let us stay there for a while after that. And Grandma and my aunts and uncles came in.
It sort of gets blurry after that.
Another pause that was full of ease.
What was your dad like?
Miss said after that.
Ty smiled.
Mum says he was like me when she met him.
Miss laughed.
Would have been a charmer then. I'm sorry I never got a chance to meet him.
He would have made you laugh, miss.
Like your dad did.
And pain.
Standing up to the pain.
I might never come up for air.
It was a sunny day, hot and dry. But in my skin,
It felt like rain. Then, as if it was just any other moment.
One last big breath in.
and let go.
To be continued. Shout out to Lewis, Zane, Caitlin, Jackson, Marcus, Jesse, Celia, Latrell, Malachi and Cooper.
And thanks to our special guest stars, Sarah, Bailey, Diana, Shayla, Toby, Karen, Lakaya, Shanice, Kane, Elias, Troy and Taylor. And if you want to hear the stories of the other students in Miss Biddle's English class,
make sure you come back for the next few episodes of Parting.
Okay, the last word we might talk about is bereavement.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, well, I guess we can ask Bianca about it since it's in her job title.
So bereavement, if we agree that grief is our response to all types of loss, bereavement is more specifically around death. When we've lost a person who has died, bereavement is that specific type of grief. The reason I'm a bereavement coordinator is because I work for the health district, specifically within the palliative care service. And my role is to, one, provide the counselling for people who've lost somebody, as well as to look at what kind of services and supports we've got in place and resources, if that makes sense.
Well, let me ask you guys before I ask Bianca, do you think that would be a hard job? A depressing job? An interesting job? What do you think?
It depends on the person, probably. Because, you can get some people that can, deal with that stuff really well. And then you can get other people that can't really deal with that really well.
It's interesting to hear about from like a third party point of view, but I think having the actual job would probably be hard because I feel like you have to be very in tune with like their emotions and how to help them.
Is it a hard job, Bianca?
We all agree that grief is a part of life and perhaps an unavoidable part of life. I think that's really how I approach my work, is that this is something that touches us all. And yes, I see suffering, but I also see a lot of beauty and gratitude and resilience from people that I learn a lot from. So I think it's a hard job, but it's a privileged job that I'm grateful to get to do.
Thanks so much to Bianca, who's the bereavement coordinator and counsellor with our local health district.
If you've enjoyed listening to our podcast, you can support us to keep making more stories by going to Beyond Empathy's website and donating.
You can make a one-off donation or commit to supporting us regularly.
Every bit helps a lot. It's an easy site to find. www.be.org.au. That's B for Beyond, E for Empathy. So be.org.au.
And even if you can't support us with money, you can really help us by spreading the word.
Tell your friends, colleagues and families to listen. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Like our posts and share them.
You know what to do. And if you want to have a conversation with the young people who've created Parting,
we are also telling a bunch of our stories in what we are calling podformances. Podformances can be live, virtual or both.
you can even host one.
You could ask us to come and present at your school, or for your team meeting, your conference, your event. Our young stars can appear live, or virtually, or both. Tell a few stories and have a yarn about grief, death and dying.
And whatever else comes up.
Just get in contact via our website. The people who have made today's podcast are myself, Lewis, Zane, Phil, Daniel, Chris, Caitlin, Jackson, Melody, Shanice, Alara, Marcus, Jesse, Celia, Latrell, Malachi, Emma, Cooper, Alice, Gemma, Elias and Justin. The music you heard in the stories is from Philip Okerstrom, Damien Mason and also Kevin McLeod.
Special thanks to our partners, TAFE New South Wales Wollongong Screen and Media, and Southern Youth and Family Services for allowing us to use their amazing studios, and Audio Technica Australia for their incredible equipment. Beyond Empathy has received funding for the podcasts from The Edge from
the Australia Council for the Arts, Create New South Wales, Zurich Australia and the Z Zurich Foundation, Coordinaire, South Eastern New South Wales Public Health Network through the Australian Government Public Health Network Program, the Australian Government Department of Social Services under the Families and Communities Program through Bernardo's Australia and the Tony Foundation. We would love to hear from you. Send us a message about our podcast or make a comment. Tell us a story. You can send us a message via our social media pages or via the website. Whatever is better for you. You have been listening to Parting, one of Beyond Empathy's podcasts from The Edge. Next time on Parting, our story about the Unteachables continues, and we hear from Ty's mate Kane, and we ask the all-important question:
what would the world be like without trees?
Catch you then!